Historically, Spain's politics had been exclusive to the conservative and liberal elite. However, in the early 20th century, Spain's political climate began to be radically transformed by many factors: the country's growing industrialization, rise of labor unions, influx of radical ideologies, increasing public discontent, and emerging anti-monarchical and anti-clerical sentiments. Then in elections in the early 1930s, a leftist political party came to power, forming a Republican government which was furthered in the 1936 elections where a coalition of leftists, socialists, and communists emerged victorious. The new leftist government took steps to radically transform Spain. A new constitution was passed that secularized the state, removed the Catholic Church's preeminence, and promoted civil liberties, free speech, and universal suffrage. Industries were nationalized and agrarian reform was implemented. The libertarian climate also incited violent anti-clericalism. Across Spain, many churches, monasteries, and other religious buildings were burned, destroyed, or vandalized. The leftist government also blamed the church and monarchy for Spain's socio-economic inequalities, the loss of the empire's vast territories, and backwardness compared to other more industrialized European countries. Spain's traditional political elite, which comprised and defended the interests of the upper classes and the Catholic Church, looked on with great alarm as the changes threatened to destroy long-venerated Spanish institutions and traditions. Consequently, politically and socially, the country became polarized into two opposite, mutually hostile forces, the left versus the right, which further escalated into violence, with the left targeting rightist elements, the church with murders and arson, employers with job actions, and agricultural landowners with seizure of farmlands, and the political right killing and jailing union leaders and leftist intellectuals and academics. Other leftists also espoused extreme ideas, including anarchism and armed revolution, while rightists and monarchists joined the Falange, a fascist party influenced by fascist Italy and Nazi Germany. In June 1936, high-ranking rightist army officers began plotting to overthrow the leftist government, their motivation being the perceived need to save Spain from self-destruction and communism. In July 1936, retaliatory killings and violence had so escalated which gave the plotters the occasion to launch a coup. As in the plan, on July 17, 1936, Spanish forces in Spanish Morocco declared a state of war against the central government, which was followed by other commands in mainland Spain also declaring war. However, other commands did not revolt or were put down by Loyalist forces, and in the aftermath, rebelling forces seized about one-third of the country and the government holding on to two-thirds. The Spanish armed forces itself became divided, with about an equal number of units joining either side of the conflict, but with the Air Force and Navy remaining loyal to the government. The crisis now appeared headed for a long civil war, as the coup had failed and the rebel forces' military resources were inadequate to defeat the Loyalist forces, while the government was incapable of quickly ending the rebellion. Rebel forces were known as Nationalists and drew the support of landowners, urban elite, monarchists, rightists, Falangists, and the Catholic Church. Loyalist forces were known as Republicans and drew the support of leftists, socialists, communists, and anarchists. German and Italian intervention in support of the rebel forces was immediate. Within 2 weeks after the outbreak of war, German and Italian planes were transporting rebel forces from Spanish Morocco to the mainland. German and Italian Navy ships soon also became involved, and further delivery of large numbers of planes, tanks, and weapons would prove decisive in the outcome of the war. The support of Germany and Italy, two fascist countries, was predicated on the rebel forces' relationship with the Falangists as aligning with fascism, and Hitler and Mussolini's loathing of the Spanish government's association with socialists and communists. By August 1936, General Francisco Franco, who led the rebel southern force, had seized much of southeastern Spain and advanced north, linking up with the northern force by September 1936. Also in September, rebel forces captured Gipuzkoa, stopping weapons deliveries from France that were entering in support of Loyalist forces. Widespread atrocities and extreme brutality were committed during this early phase of the war. Government forces targeted landowners, priests, and rightist elements, while rebel forces carried out systematic and organized violence against socialists, communists, anarchists, and separatists. France and Britain, concerned that the war in Spain might spill over into a wider European conflict, called on the international community to a conference in London, which led in September 1936 to the signing of the Non-Intervention Agreement, where 27 countries promised to desist from helping either side of the civil war. However, Germany and Italy, both signatories to the agreement, continued to secretly send weapons to the rebel forces. In response, the Soviet Union, also a signatory to the Non-Intervention Agreement, in October 1936 began sending large quantities of weapons to Loyalist forces, stating that it was merely equalizing the playing field in the Civil War. Also aiding the Spanish government were the International Brigades, a militia organized by the Comintern, or Communist International, where some 50,000 multinational volunteers arrived in Spain and fought alongside Loyalist forces. In November 1936, rebel forces launched an offensive to take the nation's capital, Madrid. The attack made some headway into the city, but soon stalled because of strong Loyalist resistance. Further operations by rebel forces in January to March 1937 were also repulsed, while government counteroffensives in July and December 1937 also failed to dislodge the insurgents. By then, rebel forces had settled into a siege of Madrid, which would last for over 2 years until the end of the war. After failing to take Madrid, where rebel forces suffered heavy losses, General Franco turned his attention to other sectors, in February 1937 capturing Malaga and bringing the whole southeastern Spain under rebel control, and then in an 8-month campaign, by October 1938, had also captured northern Spain. By then, rebel forces controlled all of western Spain and 2/3 of the country. At this point, in May 1937, the Spanish government became decidedly pro-Soviet, triggering conflict with its other constituent ideologies, the leftists, socialists, anti-Stalin communists, and anarchists, and forcing Loyalist forces to suppress the anarchists in fighting dubbed as the Civil War within a civil war. In March 1938, rebel forces advanced into Aragon, rapidly taking Zaragoza and Huesca, and forcing Loyalist forces to retreat in disarray. However, General Franco stopped his forces before Catalonia, concerned that France might militarily intervene in the war. Instead, rebel forces turned south for the Mediterranean coast, reaching Vinaros in April 1938 and thereafter extending their control of the coastline. Consequently, government-held territory was now cut into two, with Catalonia geographically separated from Madrid and the rest of central and eastern Spain. In July 1938, Loyalist forces attacked from Catalonia, starting the Battle of the Ebro in the last major attempt to reverse the tide of war. Loyalist forces initially made progress, but increasingly fierce rebel resistance and later a series of counteroffensives pushed back the Loyalists to their starting point by November 1938. The first final blow to the Spanish government's cause first occurred on September 30, 1938, when France and Britain, in a policy of appeasement to Hitler, signed the Munich Agreement with Germany and Italy, where consequently the Spanish government could not expect to receive further French military assistance. Then in August 1939, the Soviet Union implemented its own appeasement with Germany in the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, and thereafter ended its military support to the Spanish government. Furthermore, in November 1938, during the Battle of the Ebro, the international brigades were withdrawn due to mounting deaths and desertions, and the lack of new volunteers. On January 23, 1939, rebel forces launched a massive offensive into Catalonia, breaking through after initial fierce resistance and capturing Barcelona after 3 days. Some 500,000 Loyalist soldiers and civilians, including the Spanish government, fled north and in early February 1939 crossed the border into France, where French authorities interned them into refugee camps. Pursuing rebel forces soon reached the Spanish-French border, which they sealed off. At this point, although Loyalist forces still held about 30% of Spain, the war was essentially over. In Loyalist-held Madrid in March 1939, anti-communist forces overthrew the now manifestly pro-Soviet government and then defeated pro-communist forces in 5 days of fighting. The coup leaders then formed a military-civilian junta which ordered all remaining Loyalist forces not to resist the rebel advance. Thus, on March 28, 1939, rebel forces entered Madrid without resistance, where large crowds welcomed them as liberators. Rebel forces also advanced unopposed through the remaining parts of Loyalist-held territory, reaching the Mediterranean coast on April 1, 1939, thus controlling all of Spain and bringing the civil war to an end. In the aftermath, General Franco became the absolute ruler of Spain, establishing a right-wing dictatorship centered on the fascist Falange party. Communism, socialism, and anarchism were banned. Some 200,000 people were executed or died in prison during Franco's 36-year reign. After World War II, Spain became isolated because of Franco's association with the defeated fascist regimes of Germany and Italy. But with the Cold War, the United States was drawn to Spain's staunchly anti-communist stance and strategic location at the western end of the Mediterranean Sea, and in 1953, both countries signed a defense agreement. After Franco's death in 1975, Spain transitioned into a democratic parliamentary monarchy.